Welcome to LR Reports. This channel focuses on institutional research that I've personally reviewed. As a fund manager and family office analyst, my role is to filter through a large volume of research and focus only on what truly matters. AI helps structure and deliver the content efficiently, but the selection and interpretation are human.
This is The Critique. Today, we're dissecting a pivotal institutional research report from UBS Evidence Lab. It's dated January 22, 2026. The title is Microsoft Corp. On the Ground in Wisconsin, Microsoft's Fairwater AI Data Centers and the Impact on Azure Growth.
So perfect timing.
Exactly. This drops right before Microsoft's Q2 earnings and a big investor recap. So our objective here is to really unpack the logic behind what is a pretty significant contrarian call.
It really is.
UBS is raising their Azure growth estimates based entirely on their own supply-side data. It just directly challenges the market consensus, which seems to be priced for delays.
It's a bold move for sure. I mean, the consensus is nervous. Everyone's looking at headlines about power shortages, chip delays, and here comes UBS saying, look, ignore all that noise. Just look at the physical buildings.
Right.
But before we even get into the numbers, we have to talk about the methodology, because that's what makes this whole thing different.
It's the entire edge. The core of this report is a total shift away from the traditional channel check. You know, normally analysts call up 20, maybe 30 CIOs.
Ask about IT budgets, yeah.
And then they extrapolate demand from there. UBS is basically arguing that for Azure, right now in 2026, that entire method is fundamentally broken.
It's broken because demand isn't the variable anymore. It's just not. We all know the demand is basically infinite.
If they had 10 times the capacity,
They'd sell it all tomorrow. The bottleneck is 100% supply. And Microsoft management even said it. They called their Q2 guidance a supply guide.
they were explicit about it.
Yeah. They told the street, our revenue is capped by what we can physically switch on. So, calling a CIO to ask if they want to buy more AI services, it's a total waste of time. You need to know if the building is actually finished.
Which is exactly why the lead analyst, Dean Marriott, he didn't do this research from a phone in Manhattan. In mid-December 2025, the team physically went to Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin.
And this wasn't some guided tour.
No PR tour. This was an exterior investigation, in the dead of winter.
You have to appreciate the grit of that. Standing in the freezing Wisconsin snow, counting trucks, logging license plates. I mean, it sounds a little like espionage, but it's just rigorous due diligence.
Well, the report details how they were checking permits at town halls, monitoring the specific types of vehicles going in and out of the site. They use satellite imagery from the evidence lab to back this up, but the ground checks confirmed a lack of heavy machinery. No earth movers, no cranes, nothing like that outside the facility.
Right.
Instead, what they logged was a really high volume of vehicles from very specific contractors: Walsh, Hewitt, and Bolt.
Okay, hold on. Let's unpack why that mix is so important. Because if you see earth movers, you're months, maybe years away. That's just dirt work. If you see cranes, okay, you're putting up steel. But Walsh, Hewitt, Bolt, and the specific crews they saw, that tells you it's interior fit out.
The nervous system.
Exactly. The shell's done, the roof's on, and now they're installing the actual guts of the data center.
That's right. The presence of those teams suggests the work has moved entirely to racking and commissioning. And this brings us to the core thesis about Fairwater 1 in Wisconsin. The report asserts the exterior is complete.
And they put a timeline on it.
They do. They established a timeline for going live in early 2026, so February or March.
That is an incredibly aggressive timeline compared to what's been floating around.
Very.
I mean, we've all heard the whispers of 6-month delays, but if the UBS team is physically seeing commissioning crews there in December, a February launches, well, it's at least physically possible.
It is?
But the scale here, that's what gets me. The report talks about bringing this online in what, chunks? How do you even stage a launch of this magnitude?
So the ramp logic is really granular. They're not just, flipping a switch on a whole gigawatt at once.
Of course not.
The check suggests they'll bring it online in 50 megawatt increments, so the forecast is 100 megawatts operational by the end of February, then 200 megawatts by the end of March, and 400 by June.
And the goal?
The ultimate goal is hitting 1 gigawatt by the end of 2026.
Okay, pause there. 1 gigawatt? From a single site in 1 year? That flies directly in the face of local reporting.
It does.
The Wisconsin media has been saying there's a cap of 400 megawatts for phase 1. That is a massive discrepancy. I mean, that's 600 megawatts. You don't just miss over half a gigawatt of power capacity.
Right.
So how does the report explain that gap without it sounding like, wishful thinking?
This is where the detective work gets pretty technical, and they address this head on. The 400 megawatt figure likely refers to the original footprint assumptions.
Okay.
But the UBS sources argue that the density has changed. They quote a contractor who used this perfect analogy. He said, you can fit more bread in the bread box.
More bread on the bread box. So that implies they're not making the building wider, they're making the compute denser.
Precisely. And they're building up. The analysts confirmed visual evidence of 2-story data centers, which is, pretty standard. But they also spotted steel framing for 3-story structures.
A 3-story data center? Wow. That is an engineering nightmare when it comes to heat.
Absolutely.
You're stacking servers that run at temperatures close to boiling. So if they are going vertical to hit that 1 gigawatt number, they're taking on a massive thermal risk. It explains the power density, sure, but it also explains why the timeline is so fragile.
How so?
On that third floor, you don't just lose capacity, you physically melt the hardware.
Well, that leads perfectly into the hardware discussion, because the cooling isn't just a facility decision anymore. It's dictated by the chips themselves.
Right.
The thinking here is that these shells are being filled with hundreds of thousands of GPUs, specifically a mix of NVIDIA's GB200 and GB300 clusters. But the real variable, the critical one, is the integration of the new Vera Rubin chips.
Which they just announced at CES.
Announced at CES 2026. Exactly.
The Rubin chips. Okay, this connects back to the delays we saw earlier in the year. The report mentions a construction pause to evaluate the scope. At the time, the market panicked. Everyone thought the project was stalling, funding issues, permits. But if you look at it through this hardware lens, that pause looks very different.
It looks like a retrofit.
Exactly. A planned one.
The material makes a strong case that the pause was necessary to redesign the entire facility for closed-loop liquid cooling. The Vera Rubin chips cannot run on air cooling. It's physically impossible at that density.
That is such a crucial distinction. Air cooling is basically just big fans blowing over hot metal.
Right.
Liquid cooling involves plumbing water or the dielectric fluid directly to the chip itself. Retooling a construction site from air to liquid is not a minor tweak. It's a complete overhaul of the mechanical and plumbing engineering.
It explains the pause.
It explains the pause, but it also introduces a whole new level of execution risk.
How do you mean?
Because now you have high-pressure liquid running right next to high-voltage electricity. The report mentions an 800-volt architecture. If a pipe leaks in an air-cooled facility, okay, you get a puddle, you clean it up.
Messy but manageable.
Manageable. If a pipe leaks in an 800-volt liquid-cooled rack, you have a catastrophic, immediate failure. The complexity of that plumbing just creates a new fragility in the whole ramp.
And we should touch on who this is all for. The assumption from UBS is that essentially 100% of this initial capacity is dedicated to OpenAI for training runs.
That's the main assumption, and it makes sense, given the urgency. But I did notice their partner checks offered a bit of a counter-narrative.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they suggested OpenAI isn't the only horse, as they put it. They mentioned a Fortune 100 tech company and even Microsoft's own internal workloads taking up to maybe 20–25%.
Which suggests some diversification, but let's be honest, the real urgency is driven by the next GPT model. If Fairwater doesn't come online, that whole training timeline just slides.
Right. The model training is the critical path. But let's look at the things that could still trip them up. The on-the-ground checks were positive on the building shell, but they uncovered some really significant bottlenecks in the supply chain.
Transformers?
Transformers. Specifically transformers.
This seems to be the choke point for the entire industry. The report is citing, 30 to 60-day delays?
And the market needs to understand the nonlinearity of that risk. I mean, a 60-day delay on a transformer doesn't just push your launch back 60 days.
No, it's a domino effect.
It stops the electrical commissioning, which stops the server installation, which then stops the software validation. One source warned these delays could turn into 6 months in a snap.
And you can't just software patch your way around a missing transformer.
No, it's just heavy metal you have to wait for. And it's not just the hardware. It's the hands installing it. The report highlights a severe shortage of credentialed labor.
This goes back to that 800-volt architecture.
It does. You can't just hire a residential electrician to wire up a gigawatt-scale AI cluster. You need master electricians, engineers, people who are certified for high-voltage mission-critical systems. These people are rare. They're just rare.
And that scarcity is showing up in the cost, right? GCs are raising fees from 5% to 7%. Equipment prices, like those Mat-X transformers, are up 20%.
It's classic supply and demand. But the labor shortage is harder to solve than the cost. You can pay more for a transformer, fine, but you can't magically create 1,000 master electricians in rural Wisconsin. That labor constraint is a hard cap on how fast they can possibly ramp.
Okay, I want to spend a moment on what was, for me, the most alarming part of this report, the nuclear option. This deals with the power constraints for future phases.
Ah, yes. This is the real so what for the long-term investor. Phase 1 is happening. The grid can handle it, barely. But the checks suggest the Wisconsin grid is totally tapped out for anything beyond that.
And there's a specific quote.
A contractor was quoted saying, and this is direct, "There is no path to 3.5 gigawatts without the nuclear component."
Which implies a dependency on small modular reactors, SMRs, or some other solution that hasn't even been deployed at this scale yet.
And it's worse than just the technology risk. It's the social risk. The contractor explicitly mentioned the public opposition. He used this very visceral phrase, "John and Susie's hair is going to fall out."
That paints a very vivid picture of the local sentiment.
It really does. It signals intense NIMBYism. If the community in Mount Pleasant believes these data centers require nuclear reactors that might endanger them, whether that's scientifically true or not doesn't matter.
The perception is reality.
Perception is reality. They can block the permits. And in fact, the report forecasts that Phase 2 in Wisconsin will likely be delayed to 2028 because of this exact power and cooling flux. So Phase 1 is the bird in the hand. Phase 2 is very much still in the bush.
So let's translate all of this, the physical data, the social risk, into the financial models. Because at the end of the day, UBS is making a call on the stock.
Right.
They estimate that 1 gigawatt of power capacity equates to roughly $10 billion in annualized revenue.
And that's the magic number. 1 gigawatt equals 10 billion. That gives us a concrete formula we can track.
So based on this formula and the supply they see coming online, UBS is raising their Q2 December estimates for Azure growth. They're going from 35% up to 37%.
Which is still technically below the street, right? Consensus is probably closer to 39.
It is. But the direction of their revision is what matters. It's upward.
But look at the trajectory for FY27. They're predicting an acceleration to 40% growth once the full 1.8 gigawatts, that's combining Wisconsin and the Atlanta site, actually hits the ledger. That is the bull case. The supply bottleneck breaks, revenue floods in.
There's a catch, though, on the valuation side. Despite raising the growth estimates, UBS actually cut their price target from $650 down to $600.
That seems contradictory, doesn't it? Growth is accelerating, so we're cutting the price target.
It does on the surface.
But the logic holds up if you look at the whole sector. They argue it's a sector-wide derating, not a Microsoft-specific problem. The stock's trading at 22 times CY26 earnings. That's reasonable, but investors have to watch the margin drag.
Explain the margin drag mechanism for us.
It's the cost of that growth. We talked about it, the expense of liquid cooling, the 20% hike in transformer costs, the labor premiums. All of that hits COGS. New AI capacity just has a lower margin initially than legacy software does. So UBS expects Azure's gross margin to actually decline, down to maybe 53–54% in FY26.
So the trade-off for an investor is you're accepting lower profitability now to capture that market share.
Exactly. You're buying revenue growth with margin points. The thesis is, if you don't build the capacity now, you lose the AI platform war. So you take the margin hit, you build the 1 gigawatt breadbox, and you secure the revenue.
And the risk?
The risk is if that revenue ramp delays, if those transformers don't show up, you get the margin hit without the revenue growth. That's the real downside.
Okay, so let's distill this into an actionable takeaway. The report basically advises ignoring the demand-side noise. Everyone knows the world wants AI.
That's a given.
The only thing that matters now is the physical supply go-live dates.
Forget the press releases. Watch the milestones in Wisconsin. The report gives us specific dates so we can grade their homework. They need to hit 100 megawatts online by the end of February 2026.
And if we get to March 1st and there's no announcement or we see reports of, continued inactivity at the site, then the whole thesis is in trouble.
And watch Atlanta. Fairwater 2 needs to hit 600 megawatts by June. These are binary outcomes. The power is either on or it isn't.
The source for all this analysis is the UBS Evidence Lab report from January 22, 2026. It is a dense read, data-heavy, but it provides a very clear roadmap. We'd encourage you to mark those dates, end of February, end of March, on your calendars.
And keep an eye on the local news in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin. If you start seeing headlines about nuclear protests, you'll know that Phase 2 is slipping even further away.
Indeed. That concludes our critique of the UBS research logic. We hope this dissection helps you navigate the upcoming earnings print with a sharper eye on the physical reality behind all those cloud numbers. If you have a research thesis or a complex report you'd like us to break down next, please send it in. Until next time.
That's how we approach research internally. Filter first, then analyze, and only then decide what's worth sharing. If you find this useful, feel free to follow the channel. I'll see you in the next episode.